Family dinners weren't discussed. They were assignments dressed up in casseroles. You just showed up, smiled, nodded at the right times, and hoped dessert came quickly. That Sunday night before Thanksgiving was no different, at least for everyone else. The house hadn't changed in years. Same wallpaper that curled slightly at the edges, same creaky floorboards that groaned under familiarity. The dining room was dimly lit by the chandelier that hummed ever so slightly, like it, too, was tired of these gatherings. I sat at the end of the oval table, not quite at the head, but not quite invisible either. That was always my place. Not picked placed. Mom set down the cranberry glazed turkey and gave everyone a little clap like we were school children presenting a project. Dad followed quietly behind her with a tray of roasted vegetables, though I was pretty sure she could have carried it herself. He just liked feeling useful when he could. Sadie was on her phone when I walked in earlier, her thumbs tapping mindlessly. She didn't look up. She never really did unless it served her in some way. She wore a sweatshirt that still had a tag on it, which I knew she'd return next week. That was her thing. Always something borrowed. Never something earned. Dinner's ready, Mom had called out earlier like it was breaking news. We all sat, bowls passed clockwise, as we moved through the ritual of grace and greens. "So how was the drive, Lena?" Mom asked, reaching for the potatoes. I nodded. "Fine. Rain didn't slow you down?" I shook my head. "No." "Good," she said, as if that settled something. It didn't. It just paused the performance until the next cue. Conversation floated toward the usual topics. The Hendersons down the street getting a new deck, someone from church retiring, a sale at the grocery store. Each topic safe. Sterile. Curated for maximum avoidance of real emotion. I focused on my plate, pushing green beans around, only half listening. Dad chuckled at something about the mayor's speech on TV. Sadie poured herself more wine without offering anyone else. I noticed, but didn't say anything. I never said anything. Not really. Then Mom cleared her throat. "Sadie will be moving in with us for a while," she said, placing her napkin down with ceremonial care. "Just until she gets back on her feet." She didn't look at Sadie when she said it. She looked at me. "Oh," I said, keeping my tone even. "If it helps her, I don't see the problem." The words came out smoothly, like they'd been rehearsed, which, in a way, they had. Not the exact phrasing, but the shape of it. The shape of always being agreeable. Of being the one who absorbed the hits so the performance could go on uninterrupted. No one said anything for a moment. Forks paused midair. Even the hum of the chandelier seemed to still. I reached for a piece of barbecued chicken, same as every year. Same dry rub. Same slightly overcooked edges. My mouth chewed mechanically, but I didn't taste it. Not really. Sadie still hadn't said a word. She didn't have to. That's how it worked. Mom did the asking. I did the accepting. Sadie did the benefiting. "Thanksgiving will be quiet this year," Mom continued. "Just us." "Just us," I echoed, smiling slightly. The kind of smile you give when you've accepted a reality others pretend is still negotiable. Dad reached for his glass of water. I saw the way his eyes flicked toward me, then away. That was his version of a protest. A quiet acknowledgement. That used to be enough for me, used to be comforting. Now, it just felt like confirmation of everything I already knew. I pushed my chair back slightly. Not enough to leave, but enough to feel like I could if I wanted to. "You okay, sweetie?" Mom asked, suddenly aware I hadn't spoken in a while. I nodded. "Just tired." "Well, you've been doing so much lately," she said, slicing through her turkey. "Between work and helping Sadie with those job applications." I didn't respond. Because here's what they didn't know. I hadn't lived there in weeks. I'd quietly moved out of the apartment I was still technically paying for. I was crashing at a friend's place while I figured things out. I hadn't told anyone. Not because I was ashamed, but because I wanted to see how long it would take them to notice. They hadn't. The table creaked as I shifted in my chair. No one looked up. That's when I realized the table knew. It always had. It had absorbed years of silent sacrifices, held the weight of every deflected comment, and every swallowed disappointment. It knew me better than they did. And for the first time, I let that truth sit there right in the middle of the mashed potatoes and the cranberry sauce. They thought I was still the reliable one, the daughter who never pushed back. But I had already left. My body was there, but my loyalty wasn't. The table would keep their secrets, but I was done carrying them. I didn't leave my apartment. I left the role they cast me in. 3 months earlier, room 3B still smelled like lemon cleaner and old paper. The kind of scent that lingers when you wipe down a space without really living in it. I stood in the middle of the living room, the dim yellow light overhead flickering just enough to remind me I hadn't changed the bulb in weeks. I'd meant to, but like everything else back then, it just didn't feel worth it. The coffee table was cluttered with unopened mail, utility statements, a half-eaten granola bar I'd stopped noticing. But what stood out most were the rental documents I'd printed the night before, half buried beneath a thick catalog of seasonal furniture deals. I picked them up slowly, as if they might vanish if I moved too quickly. I didn't hate the apartment. In fact, I'd picked it myself 3 years ago, back when I thought independence meant square footage and a place to hang your own curtains. But lately, even the walls felt borrowed. Like any day now, someone could unlock the front door and decide they lived there too. Sadie had stayed over so many times, unannounced, with overnight bags that turned into week-long stays, that I stopped recognizing what was mine. And Mom? She made suggestions like she had a spare key. Why don't you let Sadie use your closet for now? Or, it's just space, Lena. You have so much of it. They didn't mean harm. That's what I used to tell myself. But one morning, I woke up and realized I hadn't had a full day to myself in weeks. I'd gone from tenant to caretaker of everyone else's overflow. So I made a quiet plan. I called a realtor. Her name was Dana, and she answered on the 3rd ring. "Are you the owner?" she asked. "No, I'm the leaseholder," I replied. "But I'm allowed to sublet." She paused, just briefly. "You sure you want to do this?" "Absolutely." "Okay, then send me the unit details, and I'll get it listed by tomorrow." It didn't take long. A few photos, a brief description, and within days, there were inquiries. I didn't tell Mom. I didn't tell Sadie. And I didn't feel guilty. The first few prospects were wrong from the start, too loud, too nosy, or too dismissive. But then came Trevor. He arrived 5 minutes early, buzzed the intercom politely, and waited on the sidewalk without pacing. When I opened the door, he smiled. Not a salesman's smile, but the kind you give someone when you're genuinely grateful to be invited in. "Hi, Trevor Price," he said, extending a hand. "Thanks for letting me come by. I know it's last minute." He had the kind of voice that made you want to tell him things you didn't usually say out loud. A little warm, a little uncertain, like he wasn't sure he belonged in your story, but hoped to be written in anyway. "Not at all," I said, stepping aside. "Come in." Trevor was a substitute teacher. Taught 8th grade social studies and ran a weekend chess club for kids who didn't like sports. He asked about the neighbors, the noise levels, whether the sun came through the window in the morning. But he never asked why I was leaving. That was the first sign he respected boundaries. We sat across from each other at my kitchen table, a contract between us. He read every line, lips moving silently. When he reached the clause about personal residence rights, he nodded like it meant something more than words. "Everything look okay?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "And thanks for doing this the legal way. A lot of people cut corners. I really appreciate this." In that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, acknowledged. I signed first, then slid the pen across the table. Trevor signed next, folded the document neatly, and stood. I walked him to the door, handed him the key, and we shook hands like two people trading futures. The next morning, I packed 2 suitcases. One for essentials. One for things I didn't want Mom or Sadie to drop by and pick up later. Everything else I left. I didn't owe the apartment a goodbye, but I did give it a final look from the doorway. Sunlight spilled in through the blinds, dust particles dancing in the quiet. The silence felt cleaner now. Not empty, just honest. "I didn't move," I whispered. "I got my life back." The elevator ride down was slow. I pressed the button for the lobby and watched the numbers descend. No one stopped me. No one called. No one cared. Later that week, I found a friend's guest room to stay in. Nothing fancy, just a pull-out couch, a decent lamp, and the kind of quiet that didn't feel accusatory. One night, I reread the lease again. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to remind myself, in this country, your home is your own. It doesn't belong to your family's needs or your siblings' failures. It's not sentimental real estate. It's protected by contract, by law, and most of all, by personal will. I had every right to leave. And the strangest part? They never asked where I went. Not once. It was early, just past 6, when I padded into the kitchen of the apartment I was temporarily calling home. The window above the sink was fogged from the contrast of the morning chill and the coffee pot gurgling to life. The smell was grounding, familiar in a way nothing else had been lately. I leaned against the counter, wrapped my hands around a chipped ceramic mug, and unlocked my phone. 11 new messages, all from people who rarely asked how I was doing, yet somehow always knew what I should be doing. Virginia. Daddy's bringing the bed on Saturday. No, hi, Lena. No, hope this week is going okay. Just logistics, bullet-pointed with family obligation. Virginia, again. Sadie's bringing her mirror and bookshelf. Should be set up by Sunday. I scrolled. More plans. More assumptions. Not one question. There was a photo from Sadie, her in a shop, posing with a tall silver mirror, captioned, "I'll make it homey winking face." It was the emoji that hit me hardest. That winking face, like we were both in on some inside joke, like I was part of the plan. I wasn't. I hadn't been consulted, warned, or asked. But they knew I'd been conditioned to nod. I stared at the screen, letting the steam from my coffee rise and fog up my glasses. My thumb hovered over the reply button, but nothing came. No sentence I could send would carry the weight of the history beneath this moment. So instead, I opened my notebook, the same spiral-bound one I'd kept on my nightstand for years. I flipped to a blank page and wrote, slowly, deliberately. Sadie, sophomore year. I gave up my internship interview to drive her home after her suspension. Then the next line. Sadie, age 22. I paid the last 3 months of her lease when she forgot to budget rent. And another. Sadie, last winter, she stayed for the holidays and didn't leave until April. I kept writing until the page filled. Not out of bitterness, but clarity. These weren't sacrifices. They were patterns. And if I didn't break them, they'd keep printing themselves onto the next chapter of my life. Another text buzzed in. Howard forwarded. A blurry photo of a truck rental receipt. No caption. No explanation. But the message was clear. Wheels were in motion. I took a sip of coffee that had gone lukewarm. I didn't bother warming it again. A few minutes later, the final message came. Virginia, can you stay with Dylan for a few days? Let me get used to the space. I blinked. Dylan was my cousin's kid. 12, loud, always losing his socks. I'd watched him for a week last summer when his mom had gallbladder surgery. It was meant to be a one-time thing, but like most one-time things in my family, it set precedent. I was dependable, therefore available. And if I was available, then I must be okay. And if I was okay, well, no need to check in. I looked back at the message. They wanted me to move out of my own home so that Sadie could settle in. Not forever. Just for a few days. Just until she got comfortable. Just until she made it homey. I didn't respond. I turned off my phone's notifications and set it screen side down on the counter. The silence that followed wasn't avoidance. It was assertion. They were used to me disappearing in service of their needs. But this silence? It wasn't passive. It was declared. I took my notebook and carefully tore out the page I'd written. I folded it once, then again, and slipped it into my wallet. A quiet reminder. I didn't imagine it. I wasn't being dramatic. I had receipts. Paper and ink proof that I had given more than I'd ever been asked to give, and that no one had thought to ask if I still had anything left. I rinsed out my cup. The coffee grounds in the bottom swirled like tiny galaxies circling a drain. And for a moment, I felt weightless. Not lost, but untethered from the cycle that used to hold me down. The day was starting. Somewhere in Tacoma, my parents were probably rearranging furniture, deciding where Sadie's mirror would go and whether the bookshelf clashed with the rug. They wouldn't notice my silence until they needed something else. And even then, they wouldn't call. They'd text. Saturday morning unfolded like any other in the old apartment building. A light drizzle tapped rhythmically on the window panes. Inside Unit 3B, Trevor sat cross-legged on a woven floor cushion, a headset in his ears, and a muted smile on his face. His laptop screen was filled with restless 8th graders from 3 different counties. All right, folks, he said, voice calm, you've got 5 minutes to solve the trade route map. Hint. Spices weren't the only thing sailing west. He was mid-sip of chamomile tea when the first knock came. Not a polite tap. A series of hard, impatient thuds. Trevor paused the Zoom session and stood. He wasn't expecting anyone. Certainly not anyone with the kind of urgency that made his hallway echo. He peeked through the peephole and saw chaos. 3 people. 2 women, 1 older man. All holding boxes. One box teetered dangerously in the younger woman's hands, a mirror corner poking through the top. The older woman had her phone in one hand and what looked like a houseplant in the other. He opened the door halfway. "Can I help you?" he asked, eyebrows lifting. The older woman, Virginia, didn't hesitate. "We're here for Sadie. She's moving in." Trevor blinked. This is my apartment." Virginia's brows furrowed. This was Lena's place. It was. "I signed a sublease over a month ago." "I'm Trevor." The younger woman, Sadie, gave him a once-over that dripped disbelief. She didn't say anything about this. Howard stayed quiet, holding a flat box labeled kitchen. He looked from Trevor to Virginia, then back down at his shoes. Trevor stepped into the doorway a little more, voice still steady. "I don't know what Lena told you, but she moved out. She doesn't live here anymore." Sadie scoffed. "That's ridiculous." She said I could stay. Did she actually say that? Trevor asked gently. Virginia, now visibly irritated, pulled out her phone and dialed. She's going to explain this right now. As the call rang, Trevor glanced over her shoulder to see two of his neighbors peeking from their cracked doors. Mrs. Odell, from 3A, stood at her window across the hall, arms folded in a way that said, finally. She'd always had the air of someone who saw things long before they unfolded. The phone clicked. Lena, Virginia began sharply, we're at your apartment, and there's some man here saying he lives here now. Trevor didn't move. He wasn't defensive, just calmly rooted in the truth. I was in the middle of loading laundry into a washer at a quiet corner laundromat when my phone buzzed. Seeing her name, I already knew what she'd say. I answered without flinching. Hi, Mom. What's going on? Why is there a stranger in your place? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't apologize. I didn't even sigh. I didn't lie, I said. You never asked. You just decided. There was a beat of silence on her end, the kind that made me wonder if she was replaying every ignored message, every assumption dressed up as kindness. You knew Sadie was moving in, she said finally. I heard you say that, I corrected. But I never agreed. Sadie's voice rang faintly in the background. Ask her where she is then. I heard Virginia turn away from the door, lowering her voice. Lena, why wouldn't you just say no? I swallowed. My fingers tightened around the edge of the washer. Because no never worked with you. You just said I was overreacting. Or selfish. Or making a big deal. She didn't deny it. That silence was louder than any protest. I needed space, I added. You left me none. So I made some. Virginia let out a breath that wavered between disbelief and discomfort. So what now? She has nowhere to go. Not my emergency, I said softly. You made a plan without me. I let you. I ended the call before she could say more. I didn't slam the button. Just tapped it gently, firmly, like someone closing a chapter they'd read too many times. Back at the apartment, Virginia lowered the phone. She hung up on me, she muttered. Sadie let out a bitter laugh. Classic Lena. Trevor, ever the neutral party, stepped aside just enough to indicate boundaries without confrontation. If you need a minute to rearrange plans, the hallway's dry. But I really do need to get back to class. Howard finally spoke, voice low. Maybe we should go. No one replied. But the three of them turned, shuffled, and began walking toward the elevator. Sadie's mirror bumped into the frame of the hallway wall with a muted thunk. Mrs. Odell hadn't moved. Her eyes followed them like a well-trained sentinel. When Trevor caught her gaze, she gave a slight nod. The kind that said, I knew something was off. He closed the door quietly and returned to his students, who were now filling the Zoom chat with jokes about sea monsters and historical maps. I sat in the laundromat a while longer, watching the clothes spin. No one texted. No one called again. The space around me felt earned. They had arrived with expectations. But I had already left those behind. 3 knocks. 1 suitcase dropped. And a silence that was more insulting than confusion. I had just finished sweeping the small rug by the entryway. The air smelled like citrus cleaner and the fading lavender candle I'd lit after lunch. Outside, the park across the street was alive with quiet energy, kids biking slowly down the sidewalk, a golden retriever tugging a tired man along, someone playing a guitar under the trees. Then came the knock. Not tentative. Not panicked. Just certain. I opened the door just halfway. That was all it took. Virginia, Howard, and Sadie stood shoulder to shoulder on my narrow porch like a misplaced family portrait. Sadie had a rolling suitcase with a single broken wheel and a pillow stuffed into one of her oversized tote bags. Her posture wasn't hopeful, it was expectant. She wasn't asking. She was arriving. "Well," Virginia said, eyes darting inside behind me. I'm glad you're somewhere safe." I didn't reply. I stayed planted, one hand on the door, the other tucked behind my back. Sadie brushed past both parents, her suitcase scraping the concrete with a stubborn rattle. "You said you agreed," she said flatly. "Let me in." Howard shifted uncomfortably. He hadn't spoken yet. His eyes rested on the park behind me, as though he might prefer to walk straight into it and keep going. I began carefully, that if it helped her, I didn't see the problem. I didn't move to open the door wider. I didn't soften my voice. I didn't explain, justify, or reframe. The statement stood on its own, because for once, I was going to let them feel the weight of their assumptions. Virginia blinked. "Well, that's the same thing." "It's not," I said. "It's never been the same." Sadie shifted her weight, and with it, her tone sharpened. "Are you really doing this?" I didn't answer. From somewhere upstairs, the faint hum of my neighbor's vacuum cleaner filled the pause between us. A reminder that this was my space now, not some neutral stage for family performance. Virginia stepped forward, arms crossed. "Sweetheart, I know things got tangled." "No," I said simply. "They didn't get tangled. You tied them." For a second, no one said anything. I saw it then. Sadie wasn't confused. She was insulted. She stood at the edge of my threshold like someone who had lost a bet she hadn't realized she was making. And that loss? It made her angry. She gripped the handle of her suitcase. "I gave up my sublet for this." "You gave up your lease," I said, on the assumption that I'd hand mine over. "That wasn't a plan. That was entitlement." Virginia gasped slightly, a sound more about embarrassment than pain. "Lena, that's unkind." "What's unkind," I replied, "is showing up to someone's home without asking and expecting it to be yours." Howard finally spoke, his voice a low gravel. "You could have told us. You could have said no." "I did," I said. "Just not in ways you ever listened to." There was another knock this time, from the inside. A small knock on the back of my mind that reminded me, this is what boundaries feel like. They don't always look like fences. Sometimes, they're just decisions you refuse to explain twice. I didn't raise my voice. I just reached for my phone. The movement caught all their eyes at once. Virginia squinted. "What are you doing?" "Calling Trevor," I said plainly. "Or maybe a cab. Or the motel down by 6th. But I'm not calling for permission. I'm just making sure you have somewhere else to be." Sadie's jaw clenched. Virginia's hand fluttered toward her purse, then dropped. "We don't need drama, Lena." "This isn't drama," I said. "It's just not enabling." The suitcase sat between us like an unspoken dare. I didn't touch it. I didn't help with the tote bag. I didn't even invite them inside for water. Because this wasn't hospitality, it was correction. Sadie finally bent, grabbed the handle, and turned. The scraping sound followed her all the way back to the steps. Virginia and Howard exchanged a glance. It was brief, but full of things they wouldn't say until the ride home. They didn't slam the gate. They didn't curse or cry. But they left. And I stood there, for just a moment longer, looking at the space they'd occupied. It felt thinner now, as though the porch had exhaled. From the park across the street, a kid laughed. The guitar player struck a new chord. I closed the door slowly and locked it. When the doorbell rang, I didn't flinch. I just stood still, the phone still warm in my hand from the 911 call. The silence afterward had been thick, like we all paused at the edge of a moment no one wanted to own. Then the knock came, firm, neutral, lawful. I opened the door. A woman in uniform stood before me, short, composed, her name tag reading Santos. Her hand hovered near her belt, but not in a threatening way. She gave me a calm, practiced nod. "Hi, ma'am. You called about a trespassing situation." I stepped back to let her in. "Yes, they're not supposed to be here." She followed me inside. My parents stood in the center of the living room like they still belonged. Sadie had her arms crossed, perched dramatically on the edge of the couch, flipping through her phone like she hadn't just used the spare key to walk into my life uninvited. Santos took one look and asked, "Do they reside here with you?" "No," I said. "They were never invited." Sadie scoffed. "Oh, come on, Lena." My mother chimed in, gentle but firm. "This is our daughter. We're not trespassing. We're trying to help." "Help?" I almost laughed. "By moving yourselves in without asking? By sending me to my ex's for the weekend like I'm a hotel guest in my own life?" Santos glanced at me, then at them. "Ma'am, sir," she addressed my parents, "unless your names are on the lease or you have written permission from the resident, you're considered unauthorized occupants. You'll need to leave the premises." Sadie jumped up. "She promised I could stay here." "I didn't," I said, steady. "And even if I had, I would have changed my mind after you broke in." "It wasn't a break-in," my mother snapped. "We had a key. That's how families work, Lena." I turned to Officer Santos. The spare key was supposed to be for emergencies. I never gave permission to use it for this. Santos nodded. "Understood. And you've changed the lock since." "I will. First thing tomorrow." She faced my family again. "I need you to gather your things and leave. If you resist, I'll be forced to cite you for trespassing." My father finally spoke. "But she's our daughter." Santos looked him square in the eye. "She's also an adult. And this is her legal residence." They didn't move. Not immediately. It was like watching a dam crack, no water, just pressure, building and building until something inevitably gave way. Sadie, arms shaking now, picked up her tote bag and hissed, "You'll regret this. You made a scene." I tilted my head. I've been making scenes my whole life. Quietly. She stormed out. My father lingered, then followed. Only my mother remained. She looked around, like she might find a piece of me she could still claim. My coat draped over the chair, my mug drying in the sink, the worn rug by the door. Then she stepped closer. "I remember when you used to be kind," she whispered, almost like a confession. And with that, she left too. I was midway through sorting invoices when the notification buzzed on my phone. Virginia had tagged me in something on Facebook. That in itself was strange. She usually didn't tag. She hinted. She didn't call people out. She just polished the image and let others draw their own conclusions. So, for her to go direct meant one of two things. Either she'd lost patience, or she wanted the world to know she had. The preview showed a filtered picture of Sadie, maybe 9 or 10 years old, sitting in her ballet leotard on the porch swing of our childhood home. The caption read, in a tone far too smooth for its sharpness, "Some sisters are born with grace. Some forget what grace even means." Family isn't about who's right. It's about who's there. I didn't need to open the comment section to know what was happening. But I did. There it was. A slow burn of guilt-mongering in the form of likes and hearts and teary face emojis. Aunt Marlene commented, "This broke my heart." She was always so sweet. Someone from church replied, "Family doesn't treat family this way." I noticed that Virginia hadn't responded to any comments. She didn't need to. The post was doing the work for her. The most clever part? No names were mentioned. Just enough breadcrumbs for people who knew us to fill in the rest. And of course, it was public. I saw that she even tagged Sadie, who hadn't liked or commented, but I imagine the silence was part of the performance. The "we tried everything" act. I put my coffee down and walked into my study, where the morning sun cut clean lines across the floorboards. I opened the drawer where I'd been keeping what I now called the receipts folder. Not because I wanted to weaponize it, but because I needed to remember. There were times over the last few months where even I questioned myself. Was I overreacting? Was I cruel? But reading those old texts, "Can you cover Sadie's tuition this semester?" or "It's just for a few nights, she won't take up much space," brought clarity. It wasn't one moment that pushed me out. It was the accumulation. The quiet assumptions that I would always be the one to give. The unspoken expectation that because I said nothing, I meant yes. Now, Virginia was reworking the story for public consumption. And people were buying tickets. Another notification blinked. My old high school classmate, Kevin, had commented, "Is this about Lena? That can't be true." I clicked his name, saw he'd unfriended me. Neat. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened a new note on my phone and titled it "The Narrative." I began jotting down phrases from the post: "Grace, forget, family doesn't do this," as if collecting stones laid along a path. Not because I planned to fight back the same way, but because I didn't want to be caught off guard again. This was just another version of the dinner table. Same characters, new backdrop. Only now, instead of casseroles, they served curated nostalgia. For a brief moment, I wondered how many people would believe it. How many would think I was the one who broke something sacred? But then I remembered what Dylan once told me after I'd shown him one of Virginia's older texts. "She's not posting for you," he said. "She's posting so she doesn't have to talk about what really happened." And just like that, I felt lighter. Because I realized I didn't need to convince the internet. I didn't need to issue a statement or drop a truth bomb in the comments. I had already reclaimed my voice when I didn't respond to their texts. When I moved. When I drew the line and meant it. That post wasn't for resolution. It was a smoke bomb. But I wasn't running anymore. I closed the app, placed my phone face down, and walked to the window. Outside, a group of kids was playing with sidewalk chalk, tracing rainbows on the concrete. One girl looked up, caught me watching, and smiled. I smiled back. Not because I felt victorious, but because, for once, my quiet wasn't submission. The folder wasn't fancy. It didn't have bold font or red underlines. It was just a quiet, ordinary collection of PDFs, screenshots, and email threads. Labeled cleanly. Dated precisely. Each one carried a memory I had tried to forget, until now. That afternoon, I made coffee, pulled my laptop close, and opened Facebook. The post from Virginia was still sitting at the top of my feed, collecting reactions like dust. Sadie had finally liked it, adding a broken heart emoji as if her performance needed a costume change. Still, they said nothing directly to me. So I spoke my language. Facts. I started with a scanned image of the wire transfer I made to cover the mortgage on their Tacoma home when my dad fell behind after retirement. I hadn't mentioned it to anyone, not even Dylan. Just did it. Quietly. Like I always did. Next, a text exchange from 3 years ago. Sadie had been caught with a DUI charge, and I spent hours on the phone helping her navigate the legal mess. The lawyer's retainer fee came from my savings, money I had set aside for a solo trip I never took. Then came the screenshots of her messages just 6 weeks ago. "You're being dramatic." It's not like I'm asking for much. Whatever. Stay bitter. I'll figure it out myself, like always. And finally, one more screenshot. A short note I added above it. I didn't abandon my family. I stopped volunteering for emotional debt. I didn't add anger. I didn't name call. I didn't accuse. I just posted it all. Within 20 minutes, the comments started rolling in. Some were harsh, you should have handled this privately, or airing dirty laundry helps no one. But others surprised me. My daughter went through the same thing. Boundaries are love too. My sister did this to me for years. Thank you for giving words to it. That one line, about emotional debt, that hit hard. A woman I barely remembered from childhood church messaged me. I kept my own receipts. I just never thought to share them. Thank you. It wasn't a tidal wave of support, but it wasn't isolation either. And that made all the difference. I expected Virginia to comment. She didn't. I expected Sadie to explode. She didn't. Howard? Silent as ever. Like always, the father who stayed in the background while the storm passed through. But this time, I didn't go chasing the quiet to fix it. I let it stay. I let the silence stretch. I read a comment from someone named Ruth. Some of us were raised to believe being needed was the same as being loved. It's not. I stared at that sentence for a long time. It felt like someone reached into my chest and folded the truth into one line. Later that night, I walked to my bookshelf and pulled out the small accordion folder where I had stored the physical copies of all those receipts. I flipped through them, touching each page like I was reading a past version of myself, one that believed that keeping peace meant keeping records in case she ever had to explain her worth. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was just done. I didn't want an apology anymore. I didn't need vindication from people who edited reality like it was a scrapbook. I had spent years being afraid of what would happen if I stopped being the dependable one. And now that I had, nothing exploded. They just fell quiet. No calls, no messages, just a silence that sounded too rehearsed to be real. It had been 3 days since I posted the receipts. 3 quiet days, and not the kind of quiet that heals. It was the kind that hums beneath the skin, polite, unnatural, and calculated. I knew the silence wasn't absence. It was performance. I woke up to a gray sky and the smell of rain in the air. My coffee brewed while I scrolled through notifications. Nothing new from Virginia. No direct comment. No angry rebuttal. But I noticed she had unliked 2 of my old posts, the ones she had once commented hearts on. She didn't delete her comments, just her likes. Like she wanted to quietly remove her fingerprints. There was a missed call from Dad last night. No voicemail. Just his name blinking under recents, like an unfinished thought. And then there was Sadie. Her email arrived around 3:14 a.m. The subject line read, "Let's talk." The body of the message was short. Not everything has to be public. We should talk. Not online. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I was unsure how to respond, but because I knew I wouldn't. I didn't need more words without weight. I didn't need her rewriting the scene again, asking me to play the soft-spoken sister who listens and absorbs. I clicked delete. Not because I was angry, but because I finally understood what boundaries felt like. They weren't walls. They were choices. And I had made mine. I sat down at the small writing desk Dylan helped me assemble when I first moved in. It still smelled faintly of pine. I opened my journal and wrote the line that had been resting in my chest for days. Not everything that breaks needs fixing. Some things just need space. A few months ago, that thought would have gutted me. I used to believe that broken meant failing. That distance meant disloyalty. But now it just felt honest. I thought back to all the times I had broken the silence first. Sent the apology text. Extended the invitation. Showed up at the family barbecue with extra dessert just to make sure no one was uncomfortable. This time, no one reached for me. Sadie didn't follow up. Howard didn't call back. Virginia didn't tag me, message me, or comment on anything. Instead, she liked to quote someone else posted about forgiveness being the mark of maturity, then unliked it within the hour. The performance was slipping. They didn't know their lines anymore. And for the first time, I didn't rehearse mine either. I folded my laundry in silence, cleaned the dishes, took a walk around the block, and not once did I reach for my phone to check for messages that weren't coming. Because I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for their version of peace. Not for a half apology delivered through gritted teeth. Not for some nostalgic memory to soften what had happened. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't hard. I was just done auditioning. That evening, I sat on my couch with a cup of tea and a blanket over my lap. I lit the lavender candle I'd been saving for no reason other than it felt too nice to use. And I let the room be still. The silence was there, thick like fog, but it didn't feel heavy. It didn't ache the way it used to. This time, it wasn't something I was drowning in. The envelope was thick. Formal. Like an apology dressed up in denial. I found it in the mailbox late Saturday morning. It stood out against the usual stack of bills and takeout flyers, a cream-colored rectangle, textured like parchment, sealed with a gold sticker shaped like a dove. There was no return address. Just my full name, written in a looping script I recognized instantly, Virginia's handwriting. She had always believed cursive lent credibility, as if a swirl on a capital L could make anything feel warm. I stood by the sink, the envelope unopened, the kettle hissing in the background. I already knew what it was. I peeled it open anyway. Inside was an invitation to my parents' 40th wedding anniversary celebration. A family dinner to celebrate unconditional love, it said. Unconditional, such a curious word, often wielded like a net and thrown without aim. The event was scheduled for the following Saturday, 5 p.m. sharp at the Tacoma Country Club. Attire, semi-formal. Family, expected. No note. No hope to see you. No acknowledgement of the last month. Just a formal call to resume the role I had quit. I turned the card over. The back featured a photo from what looked like a family barbecue, a smiling moment, carefully chosen. Everyone was there. Virginia, Howard, Sadie holding a wine glass. Even some of our distant cousins. But I wasn't in it. I wasn't cropped out. I had simply never been in the frame to begin with. My phone rang. It was Courtney, my old roommate from college. We hadn't talked in months, but apparently she still followed Virginia's public posts. Hey, she said, a little awkward. Saw the anniversary invite. You going? I let the question hang in the air while I stared at the photo again. No, I said softly. There's no need to re-enter a story I already left. Courtney was quiet for a moment. Then she laughed a little, the kind of laugh that carried recognition. Good for you. After we hung up, I sat at my desk, invitation in hand, turning it over like it might reveal a hidden message. But the only message was the one written in invisible ink. Play your part. Pretend nothing happened. Come eat and smile. Virginia believed in ceremony. She always had. Christmas cards, thank you notes, Easter brunches with name tags and polished silver. But it wasn't about celebration. It was about order. Structure. Scripted affection in 3 courses. This invitation wasn't for me. It was for appearances. For neighbors and church friends and Facebook photos captioned with words like grateful and togetherness. I walked over to the corner of the room where the paper shredder sat beside the bookshelf. I hadn't used it in months. It still hummed faintly when I plugged it in. I slid the invitation in. The motor word and the card disappeared slowly, inch by inch, in crisp, jagged lines. A small act, but it felt like burning down a paper house, quiet, final, and clean. I watched until the last corner was gone. No RSVP. No reply. That was the only answer I needed. I walked back into the apartment I used to own, and for the first time, I was a guest. Trevor had texted that morning. "Hey, a few pieces of mail came with your name. Want to swing by?" It was a quiet Sunday. Cloudy, but warm in that almost spring kind of way. I brought a small canvas tote with me, out of habit, not necessity. I told myself I'd just grab the mail and go. But part of me knew I was walking into something less practical. Something more like final. The building looked the same. The brick still chipped near the front stoop. The intercom still buzzed before clicking open with that too loud clack. But the feeling inside had shifted. Or maybe I had. Trevor greeted me at the door with a mug of something herbal in hand. "Want tea?" "No, I'm good," I smiled. "Just here for the paper trail." He laughed softly and handed over a small stack, mostly bank statements and a few catalogs I hadn't unsubscribed from. Then he stepped aside. "Come in. No pressure. Just, if you want to." I hesitated. Then I walked in. The air smelled different. Warmer. The couch had moved. The curtains were navy instead of the cream ones I'd left behind. There were books stacked in uneven towers beside the TV, and a framed photo of what looked like his niece or cousin on the side table. "This is yours now," I said aloud, surprised by the weight of it in my own voice. Trevor glanced at me, then back at the window. "Not really. Least you know." He said it casually, but something in it struck me. It was the kind of line you only notice if you've spent too long trying to own things that were never yours to begin with. I stepped further in. The rug was different. The wall where I used to hang a quiet quote about peace now had a clock round, modern, ticking just slightly too fast. "Do you miss it?" he asked gently. "No agenda." "I used to think this place was my pause button," I said, running my hand along the back of the chair. "But I think it was really just a chapter break. Not the ending." He nodded. "It's a good space. You left it well." I turned toward him. "What do you mean?" He sipped his tea. "I've had apartments where the walls still carried arguments. Or desperation. Yours felt like someone healed here. That caught me off guard. I had never thought about healing as something you could leave behind for someone else to feel." I glanced toward the window, the one where I used to sit with a chipped mug of Earl Grey and watch the city turn pink at sunset. The sun now fell in almost the same pattern, but a little off-center. The trees had grown, just enough to shift the light. Outside, I noticed Mrs. Odell from 3A carrying her grocery cart up the front steps. She caught sight of me through the window and smiled. "It's quieter now," she said, muffled through the glass, but unmistakable. I waved back. It wasn't shade in her voice, just observation. Trevor walked me to the door. "Need help carrying that?" he asked, motioning to the mail. I shook my head. Light load. And it was. Not just the envelope weight. Everything felt lighter now. I stepped outside and paused. There was a moment, just standing there on the sidewalk, where I looked back up at the apartment. At the window. At the place I once called refuge, then obligation, then memory. The sunlight hit the exact spot where I used to sit. A perfect streak of gold. For once, I didn't feel like I'd left too soon. Or too late. Just at the right time. I returned to the farmer's market, not for produce, but for peace. The early spring sun filtered through light clouds, warming the asphalt and sweetening the air with hints of citrus and rosemary. Booths lined the plaza like old friends, reliable, colorful, humming with the kind of soft joy that didn't demand much from you. I used to come here to disappear. Now I came to breathe. The flower vendor, a short man with crinkled eyes and a ball cap that read veteran, stubborn as ever, gave me a look of half-recognition as I approached. "Well, look who the wind brought back," he grinned, brushing pollen from his apron. "Been a while, hasn't it?" "Too long," I said, smiling. He didn't ask where I'd been or why I looked more tired around the eyes, but stood a little straighter. Instead, he reached into a small wooden crate and pulled out a stem of lavender. "For courage," he said, tucking it into my coat pocket without ceremony. "Thank you," I whispered, touched more than I expected to be. I wandered slowly, deliberately. No one waited for me. No text buzzed in my coat. For once, the world didn't feel like it was borrowing pieces of me I couldn't spare. A stand of handmade soaps. A boy with a ukulele singing off-key, but smiling like it didn't matter. A woman handing her toddler a plum too big for his hands. I stopped in front of the antique booth, the same one that used to carry old clocks and rusted keys. This time, it was a mirror that caught my eye. Oval. Bronze frame. Worn, but intact. It leaned against a crate of vintage salt shakers, catching the morning sun in its glass like a memory. That's when I heard it. "You're the one from that Facebook post, aren't you?" I turned. A couple stood nearby, early 70s maybe, dressed like they had somewhere simple and good to be. The woman's eyes were kind, but searching. The man stood slightly behind her, not accusing, not even curious, just waiting. I inhaled once, slow. "I'm the one who needed to breathe," I said. The woman nodded. Not approval, not judgment, just acknowledgement. As if she, too, had once needed to step away from a role everyone assumed she'd stay in forever. They moved on. No fuss. I turned back to the mirror. At first, I didn't really see myself. Just outlines and movement. But then the reflection settled. Caught. And I saw me. Not the daughter. Not the fixer. Not the backup plan. Just Lena. My hair pulled back loosely. A small lavender branch peeking out of my pocket like a secret. My shoulders no longer curled inward like an apology. There was something new behind my eyes, not anger, not sadness. Not even defiance. Just space. I didn't flinch. For the first time, I wasn't measuring my reflection against someone else's expectations. I wasn't checking to see if I looked too much like my mother or too little like someone they could be proud of. I was just there, standing, present, and it was enough. I walked to the tea stand, bought a cup of peppermint, and sat on the edge of the small fountain near the library steps. Children tossed coins into the water. A man leaned his bike against the railing and adjusted his scarf with care. Someone laughed behind me. It wasn't a new life, but it was a returned one. One I didn't owe anyone an explanation for. They left a chair for me at the dinner. Not a place at the table, just a symbol. The restaurant wasn't extravagant, but it wore its ambition proudly. White tablecloths, flickering candles, those napkins folded into shapes no one ever uses at home. My parents had reserved the side room with the arched windows and floral wallpaper. The sign on the door read, "Whitmore 40th Anniversary," in gold script. 40 years. A number that felt less like time and more like a monument. They all gathered, Aunts in pearl earrings, uncles in worn suits, cousins with stiff smiles. Some I hadn't seen since before high school. Others I'd never really known at all. The room buzzed with stories half true and half practiced. People commented on how well Howard still carved roast beef, how Virginia hadn't aged a day, how Sadie looked tired, but still so creative. The chair stood near the edge of the main table. Not pushed in, not tucked away. Just there. A quiet fixture. Virginia told the server, "Leave it be. She might show up late." But she didn't believe that. She said it the way someone lights a candle they know the wind will blow out. When people asked, "Where's your eldest?" Virginia offered a tight-lipped smile and a sip of Chardonnay. "She's finding herself," she'd say. "Always has been more independent." But the word hung oddly in the air. Not like pride. More like a warning not to ask again. Howard didn't say much. He stirred his coffee long after it had cooled. A relative leaned toward Sadie, voice hushed, but not low enough. "I read her post, you know. Lena's. Brave, what she did." Speaking like that? Sadie blinked slowly. It was complicated. Still, the woman added, "Truth makes people uncomfortable. Doesn't mean it's wrong." No one responded. Later, when the slideshow played on the small projection screen, a montage of yellowed photographs and grainy home videos, there I was. A little girl holding a cat too big for her arms. A teenager in a graduation cap, but in the printed album left on each table. I was missing. Sadie flipped through it slowly, her fingers hovering. On one page, there was a family photo, Mom, Dad, Sadie, the backyard roses blooming behind them. And the caption, "Our World." Her hand paused, not because I wasn't there, but because she knew I had been. Virginia caught her daughter's glance. She asked not to be included. She lied, adjusting her bracelet. Sadie didn't reply. She closed the album, but not gently. Midway through dessert, someone made a toast. "To love that lasts," an old friend said, raising his glass. "And to the family that holds it together." People clapped. Virginia smiled, touched her chest lightly. But then her gaze drifted to the chair. Still empty. Still untouched. She leaned over to Howard, her voice barely above breath. "I miss the girl who used to say yes." Howard didn't look at her. He didn't speak. He just took a long sip of water and set the glass down too carefully. Somewhere near the bar, a cousin whispered, "You know, that chair feels like an indictment." Nobody corrected him. No one dared. Back at my apartment, I turned off the kettle just before it whistled. The soft clink of the tea bag against the mug felt more celebratory than any toast. I didn't check my phone, didn't scroll, didn't wonder if someone would reach out or if my name came up when they passed the potatoes. I curled up near the window, watching the traffic hum below. The world went on. So did I. I used to drink tea to calm down. Now I drink it to celebrate quiet. The sun came in soft through the blinds that morning, no alarm, no text buzzing against the table, no footsteps pacing outside my door. Just the soft whisper of steam rising from the kettle and the distant hum of the city stretching awake. I sat on my couch, knees tucked under me, holding the mug with both hands. There was no noise inside me. That was new. When I first moved into this apartment, I'd kept everything tucked away, emotionally and literally. The boxes stayed taped up in the corner for weeks, like I didn't trust the space to hold me yet. I only started hanging things once I realized I wasn't trying to escape anymore. There was a knock on the door. Not loud, not urgent. Just the kind of knock that sounded like it came from someone used to waiting. I opened it to see Mr. Curtis, the retired Marine on the third floor who always wore a pressed button-down even on Saturdays. He held something small wrapped in an old dish towel. "Sorry to bug you," he said, lifting it slightly. "My electric kettle just died mid-boil. Used to belong to my wife. Yours whistles like hers. Brought it by in case you don't mind swapping out cords or something, duh." I took it gently. "You can have mine for the day," I said. She'd probably be glad to hear it singing in someone else's kitchen. He smiled and nodded. "You remind me of her," he said. She didn't talk much, but she knew when quiet meant peace and when it meant trouble. I watched him go, the borrowed kettle cradled like something sacred. It struck me how much weight we give to ordinary things once we lose what they remind us of. A few hours later, as I watered the snake plant by the window, another knock. Lighter this time. I opened the door and found a little girl, maybe 7 or 8, hugging a worn stuffed elephant. I recognized her from the unit down the hall. "Hi," she said. "My mom said you have the pretty flowers by your window." I smiled. Guilty. She peered inside. "Do you live alone? Isn't it scary?" I crouched down to her level. "Only if you forget you belong to yourself," I said. "But once you remember, it's kind of like having your own magic fort." She giggled. "I live with 2 brothers. I wish I had a magic fort." "Maybe you can build one," I said. "Start with a plant and some crayons." She gave me a thumbs up, serious and proud, then skipped back down the hall. I watched her go, heart strangely warm. Back inside, I poured a second cup of tea and sat on the floor next to the bookshelf. I used to sit like this in the old place, knees close, phone in hand, waiting for a message, an apology, a sign I was still worth something if I just held on long enough. Now I sat and felt none of that. There was no performance, no pretending to be small enough to make others comfortable. The steam from my mug curled toward the ceiling. I closed my eyes, placed a hand over my chest. My heart was steady, no tremor, no racing. For so long, I measured my worth by their approval. If I was quiet, I was good. If I helped, I was valuable. But helping had turned into erasing myself. And silence had become a cage. Now, silence was a garden. I chose it. Mr. Curtis returned the kettle just before dusk. He handed it back with both hands and a smile. "Still works." "Thank you." "Of course," I said. She had good taste. He paused. "You're not just living here. You're building something, huh?" I nodded. Finally, he didn't need to say more. Some people carry understanding in their bones. As night fell, I made one last cup of tea, this time with mint leaves I'd been drying near the window. I watched the steam again, not waiting for anything. I wasn't waiting for their apology. I was building something where none was needed. The last message wasn't a cry. It was a decision. I was folding laundry that evening, a task so ordinary it almost erased the weight of the past few months. Warm towels, a stray sock, the smell of lavender detergent clinging to the air. The window was cracked open, and I could hear someone's wind chimes from the neighboring balcony. It was peaceful, mundane, even, and I liked it that way. The phone buzzed on the counter. Just once. Not urgent. Just enough to interrupt the soft rhythm of fabric and thought. I picked it up expecting a spam alert or a delivery confirmation. But it was Sadie. A single message. "Despite everything, you're still my sister." No punctuation, no greeting. Not angry. Not apologetic. Just there. For a long moment, I stood with the phone in my hand, a folded t-shirt forgotten in my arms. I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel relief either. Just a kind of hollow stillness, like someone had knocked on a door I'd already locked not out of spite, but necessity. Sadie had never been one for apologies. She preferred implication over confrontation. Statements that hinted at something tender without ever touching the heat of real remorse. "You're still my sister" wasn't an olive branch. It was a reminder. Or maybe a thread, one she wasn't ready to cut. But I was no longer reaching for that rope. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the half-folded laundry pile sagging beside me. The message stayed on the screen. I didn't reply. I didn't delete it either. It wasn't that I wanted to keep it, but deleting it felt like giving it power. Like pretending it had hurt more than it did. It hadn't. Letting go isn't deleting. It's deciding not to restart. There was a time when I would have read that message 10 times, showed it to a friend, overanalyzed the phrasing, wondered what it really meant. Would she reach out again? Was this her way of saying sorry without saying it? But I didn't need to know anymore. I had spent years inside a role that required constant emotional interpretation, decoding what silence meant, what half-smiles meant, what invitations meant that arrived without acknowledgement of the harm they followed. That job had no retirement plan, just burnout. I'd already quit. So I put the phone face down on the nightstand. Across the room, the tea kettle started to hiss. I stood up and walked to the kitchen, slowly. No rush. No wait. Just a woman making tea on a quiet evening. I didn't rehearse a reply in my head. I didn't scroll back to old photos. I didn't even tell anyone she'd messaged. There's a difference between being cold and being done. One numbs you. The other frees you. As I poured the hot water into my favorite mug, the one with the chipped edge and the painted sunflowers, I thought about how much I'd mistaken endurance for love. How long I'd believed that staying connected, even when it hurt, was a virtue. It wasn't. Not everything fractured needs gluing. Some things just need setting down gently and walking away from. The steam from the mug curled upward, drifting past the window pane like something released. I leaned against the counter and closed my eyes for a moment, letting the quiet wrap around me, not because I had nothing left to say, but because I'd already said everything that mattered. And in that quiet, I realized I was no longer the version of me they remembered. I wasn't waiting, not for the next apology, not for the next invitation, not for anything, because closure doesn't come from others. It comes when you stop rehearsing your own pain. And I had finally stopped. I signed a lease last week. Not for an apartment, for a life I chose, start to finish. The paper was thick and smooth under my pen. The landlord slid it toward me, smiling gently. "Not many people start over at your age," she said, like it was a compliment and a question at the same time. I returned the smile. It's not starting over. It's starting without asking first. The office was quiet, just the soft rustle of leaves brushing the window. Outside, the morning sun filtered through dogwood trees lining the sidewalk. It felt like spring had waited for me to catch up. The space I rented wasn't big. A storefront tucked between a used bookstore and a consignment shop in a quieter part of town. A chalky old sign still hung above the glass, "Jenkins Tailor and Repair." That would come down. I'd already imagined what would go up. Third Cup Tea House. A place for people like me. The ones who needed their third cup not for caffeine, but for clarity. When I pushed open the door, it creaked in a way that felt almost staged. The scent inside was musty with hints of cedar, old fabric, and something like possibility. Dust motes danced in the sunlight, streaking across the hardwood floor. I took a deep breath and stepped in. For years, I'd decorated spaces with compromise. Shared corners, mismatched intentions, borrowed time. This place was different. It didn't echo with anyone else's expectations. There wasn't much inside, Just a wooden counter, some shelving, and one cracked window near the back. But when I ran my hand along the grain of the counter, I felt warmth. Like it remembered hands that built things. Like it welcomed mine. I placed the lease on the counter and ran my fingers over the final signature. My name, clean and full. No extra names attached. No signatures above mine to approve. Later that day, I walked to the park with a notebook and a thermos of tea. The same bench as always, but I sat differently. Not curled in, not braced for a call or a message. Just breathing. A boy with a gap-toothed grin ran past me, doubled back, and held out a wildflower. "You look like someone who'd like yellow," he said. He was right. I took the flower and tucked it in the spiral of my notebook. "Thank you," I said. "That's exactly the color I needed." The boy grinned wider, gave a thumbs up, and ran back to whoever was waiting beyond the oak trees. That night, I walked back to the new space. No one knew I was there. No one had to. The key turned easily in the lock. I flipped the lights on and laid my notebook on the empty counter. The first page had one sentence: "You can belong to yourself." I opened the back window. The breeze rolled in, cool and quiet. I brewed tea on the small hot plate I'd brought and leaned against the doorframe, sipping slowly. Across the street, a man helped his elderly mother into a car. A couple argued about how many eggs to buy. Normal things. Beautiful in their ordinariness. I didn't think about Sadie. Or Virginia. Or the anniversary. I didn't need to retell that story anymore. Not even in my head. What had happened had shaped me, yes, but it didn't define what came next. I rearranged one of the shelves, humming without realizing it. I wasn't filling the space. I was letting it speak. The door had no bell yet, but I liked that. No alarms, no announcements. Just whoever came, came. I stepped outside for a moment and looked at the storefront from the sidewalk. The reflection in the window was soft, backlit by the light inside. I didn't flinch. I was here, and not for anyone else's version of who I used to be. The wind shifted, catching the edge of the paper taped to the inside window, my handwritten "Coming Soon" sign. It fluttered, but didn't fall. When I stepped back in, the door clicked shut behind me. Just a soft sound, but final in its way. And something inside me, something I hadn't named in years, opened for good. I'm someone who's lived through this story from the inside, maybe not with the same names or details, but with the same weight in the heart. And if you've followed Lena's journey all the way here, then maybe a part of you has lived it too. What stayed with me most wasn't the silence she endured, but the strength it took to walk away without needing applause. Sometimes, peace isn't given to us. We have to build it quietly, with trembling hands and a voice that no longer asks for permission. And perhaps the real miracle isn't that Lena survived the betrayal. It's that she learned to stop rehearsing her worth to people who already decided not to see it. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? The one who was expected to give, absorb, and never ask? If so, I'd love to hear your story. Drop a comment, or just type #1 if this touched something in you. And if this story brought you a little clarity or comfort, consider subscribing. There are many more gentle tales waiting to be told, stories that don't shout but still echo in the soul. Thank you for walking with us through all 16 chapters. You didn't just read Lena's story, you honored the stories of so many who've lived in quiet strength. Until next time, take care of your space, your peace, and the life you're building, one quiet choice at a time.